Good morning, everyone. I'm Byron Burton, a National Arts Entertainment Journalism Award winner for my work at The Hollywood Reporter and the awards editor at Awards Focus. It is Oscar season, and everybody wants to know what's the best film of the year. Well, if you ask myself or Hugh Jackman, who just did a recent Q&A with the film star, we're going to say Living. I'm so lucky today to be speaking with Emilie Levienaise-Farrouch for Living, the incredible film that tackles a man who's in the middle of the darkest hour of his life, and yet he finds a way to live again, unlike anything he's done, where he earns the nickname Mr. Zombie. Living is a brilliant film from Sony Picture Classics. I'm so lucky to be speaking with Emilie today. Emilie, how are you?
I'm very good, and you?
Very well. I'm excited to dive in. Thanks so much for coming in. For now, let's show a little clip of the trailer.
But he's never late. Something must have happened.
Mr. Williams, tis you.
I was thinking lunch at Fortnum's.
Fortnum's?
Why not?
Mr. Williams, I'll tell you my secret nickname for you. Mr. Zombie.
Mr. What? Bravo, Miss Harris. No, I remember what it's like to be alive.
Bill did not see the original film this is based off of. When you first got wind of the project, can you give me a little background on your introduction to not only the directors, the producers, the team involved, but the actual material itself?
So I had seen Ikuru maybe like 12 years ago. You know, when you're at university, it's one of those classic films that you feel like you have to watch. And I watched it and I absolutely loved it. It was just stunning. It really, really touched a nerve for me. And then I didn't watch it for a decade. And I was invited to have a chat with Oliver about the project. And when I found out what it was originally, I thought it was slightly terrifying because it was tackling a film that is, you know, incredible and a masterpiece of Japanese cinema. But then I got sent the script, and because it's Ishiguro, and you know, I'm a fan of The Remain of the Days and like his books, I had to read the script, and immediately I understood why they wanted to remake the film. It's just because they had an amazing writer with both, you know, the ability, the sensitivity to tackle this Japanese story, but also this complete understanding of British culture that allowed to reset it in 1950s London. And yeah, that's completely, after reading the script, I knew that I wasn't scared to tackle Ikuru at all because it was in amazing hands.
Thematically, are you sketching out stuff for the characters early on? Are you coming up with some ideas after reading the script? I mean, Oliver, you mentioned Oliver Hermanus. How does he like to work with a composer? And was that different for this film? Did he want to try something new? I know you guys were doing the first productions for Bill since the COVID pandemic. So this was his first time back in the saddle with all the new protocols. Did that affect your process with working with Oliver?
A little bit, in the sense that every time we had a in-person meeting, there had to be a test organized beforehand. But I know it affected them quite a bit during the filming. We got the tail end in the recording session, so it was a lot easier than films I had done the year before. But yeah, it was interesting because I think Oliver loves to map things quite early in advance and have a very clear vision of the film long before he's even, you know, on set. And there was a few concepts that I discussed with him in the interview process, and he was very excited about it. So I think really early on we started coming up with ideas such as using the voices in a way to represent a sense of community, the difficulty of communicating that William's experimenting. I think we didn't plan on the piano being as present as it was in the end, but you know, we started having those early concepts, those early thought and exchanging playlist and music. But then, which happened with every film, I think you do have to just see the film evolving in the edit. So you can have all those concepts, all those ideas, all those discussions before filming. But then, especially I think in terms of music, so much of it happens when you start seeing the performances, the pacing of the actors, the pacing of the camera movement. And you just have to listen to what the film is and respond to that and write to that. So there was a few original concepts that we might have had at script level that were abandoned and then, replaced by what we felt this specific film that we had in front of us needed.
Now, when you were speaking about adaptations, this one not only handles the material so brilliantly, but it's a true translation, no pun intended, because the setting is post-World War II London. So you have an entirely different idea of where we find this man in his life when it becomes apparent that his time is short, and that sort of revolution that takes place. And that gives you so much to play with musically. There's so many emotions that you get to play with in the film. Can you talk through the first cue that you wrote and what scene really spoke to you that you saw and said, okay, I'm starting here and we'll see how Oliver feels about this cue, I
think what is interesting, and I'm sure other composers who listen to this will relate to that, the first cue I wrote didn't make it into the film, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because the melody, the theme that was at the center of that cue, that made it into the film. So it was for the first moment where William goes down the stairs of County Hall to go to his medical appointment, and we used a jazz standard, like a beautiful lush 50s jazz track, and I had a cue that used the bass clarinet, which is used throughout the score and is to me associated with him. I don't know why, it's just the sound and Bill's physique, and I don't know, there's just like a anthropomorphism with the instrument, I suppose. But yeah, so I had this melody that felt so right for that sequence, that slow motion sequence, and the cue itself didn't feel right, but then the theme remained William's theme throughout, and his reference, and develop even further for piano later in the film. So yeah, it was unusual in that sense, because the cue itself got taken out of the process pretty early on, but the theme felt really right.
In terms of character theme, you have obviously Bill is a central figure here, but Miss Margaret, played by Amy Lou Wood, she's fantastic, and she does offer so much to the character in terms of a breath of fresh air, new perspective. Was there some musical choices you wanted to make to differentiate the two? The piece of music that is written not for her particularly, but it's their interaction in the park when they go to Fortnum and then they go for a walk. That one was more about representing the type of relationship that they have rather than her particularly, because I think if it had been something that represent her, it would have been slightly more joyful and dynamic. But this was more about their relationship and the fact that it's romantic in a sense, but not in a amorous way. There's no flirtation, there is absolutely no innuendo or anything happening there, but there is an appreciation, and he is fascinated by her youth, so we had to have something that is both restrained and warm. And it was quite a tricky one, actually, to find something that didn't feel too sweet, too sugary, but kind of found this balance between who he is and who she is. So that's the cue, I think, that addressed her character the most.
or
And
their relationship.
music, in terms of the instrumentation, can you talk a little about any experimenting that you did and what you really fell in love with there?
Yeah, I think so. One of the early ideas was the use of vocals, not necessarily with any words or any lyrics or anything, but just short vocal patterns or kind of tones, long sustained notes on. We had 12 singers, so quite a small vocal ensemble. And the reasoning for me behind it is there's an early line of dialogue in the film when they mention how it's rather like church. And to me, thinking back about the British society in the 50s and earlier, I think regardless of belief or being religious, I didn't try to make the score religious, but it felt like singing in a congregation was a very important part of community building, and that the fact of using those vocalists that were a mixed group in terms of female and male vocalists would be a really interesting kind of not distillated, but like really straight to the core of a representation of community.
We spoke about the first cue you wrote that we salvaged the melody, as is often the process. Can you tell me about either the final cue when you're coming down to recording and you need to get them all approved, or the cue that maybe you just kept revisiting until you massaged it into the utter perfection that we hear now?
I think the cue, the one... Yeah, the cue that was the longest one to write and needed some tweaks until the end is the cue that is playing on a train journey where all William's colleagues are discussing what happened in the few weeks just gone. And yeah, that one is for solo piano, but it is, I think, in total like 8.5 or 9 minutes, eight and a half, I think, minutes of music that have to completely accompany things that are on screen and the realizations of the 4 characters in the carriage, but also the evolution of the narrative and what they're remembering. So that was tricky because you have to keep things simple enough for the dialogue to sing through and then just tailor everything so that it matches what's happening on screen. So that one was probably the final cue to write and the final cue to make little adjustment just to make sure everything was landing right, and then record everything on a piano that had the sound that I wanted. And
so if you could give some advice
to composers, to aspiring composers, we are given a very short amount of time on Earth. A vast majority of the time we're going to be awake is going to be working. So if you find a way to make it so that those hours when you're awake and you're alive, you're doing something that really matters to you, really matters to you. I'm not saying validation of other people, but like when you're doing it and when you're accomplishing it, it creates a sense of overwhelming joy in you. Just try to make as much space for it as possible, and just keep going because everyone else will give up. So for aspiring composer, that one is for aspiring composers. Just keep going because
Well, I just wanted to let you sum up there because this is such a rich conversation. It's a rich film. There's so much more to dive into. I feel like whether you're talking to the cinematographer, Oliver as the director, the cast, or yourself, it's just such a rich film with so many layers and so much thought that went into it that you see on the screen. It's an amazing collaboration. So Emilie, they're lucky to have you, and you were very lucky to find such a beautiful project.
Oh, what you were saying about all the other head of department and creative, it is pretty mind-blowing. They're just all incredibly talented. So I've been very, very lucky with that one, that's for sure.
Well, we certainly are lucky here at Awards Focus for your time today. We thank you again, and everyone, please check out Living, available in all categories for consideration. Sony Picture Classics Living. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.